Discovering in your grandfather's will that you just inherited the entire family business is great. Discovering this at the exact same lunch where your dad just called you a spineless coward with no future in front of 40 relatives? Pure cinema. I'm Wade Carson, 32 years old, and I've spent my entire life listening to my father, Curtis Carson, self-proclaimed titan of hardware retail, tell me I was too weak, too sensitive, too artistic to run anything of actual value. See, I committed the cardinal sin of choosing architecture over joining the family business. In Curtis's world, that made me about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. The family business, for context, was Carson Hardware, a chain of 7 hardware stores scattered across the interior of North Carolina. Started by my grandfather Victor back in 1967, built from nothing into a small empire, real blue-collar American dream stuff. Victor was the kind of man who could fix anything with duct tape and determination, who knew every customer by name, who believed a handshake meant something. Curtis? Curtis believed a Rolex meant something. He'd been running the stores for 15 years, ever since Victor semi-retired, and had spent most of that time trying to squeeze every penny while letting the actual customer experience go to hell. But hey, what did I know? I was just the guy who drew little houses for a living. Victor died on a Tuesday in March. Massive heart attack in his wood shop. Went out building a birdhouse for his neighbor, which felt almost too perfect. He was 83, sharp as a tack until the end, and probably the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was worth something. The funeral was Friday. Standard stuff. Lots of flannel, uncomfortable folding chairs, a preacher who clearly didn't know Victor very well going on about peace and rest. Victor didn't want peace. Victor wanted to build things. But whatever. The real show was the post-funeral lunch. Curtis had reserved the entire back room of the Pinehurst Country Club, because nothing says humble hardware store family like a country club, right? 40-something relatives packed in, all in their Sunday best, picking at overpriced chicken and pretending they'd actually liked each other. I was sitting at the far end of the main table next to my cousin Tessa, who was at least tolerable company. She worked as a nurse in Charlotte and had the good sense to escape family drama most of the time. We were making quiet jokes about Aunt Mabel's hat, seriously, it had feathers, when Curtis decided it was speech time. He stood up, tapped his glass with a fork, and waited for silence with this smile that made my skin crawl. That I'm about to enjoy this smile. I want to thank everyone for being here today, he started, voice all somber and appropriate. My father was a great man, a builder, a provider. A man who understood what it meant to create something lasting. Here we go, I thought. And I know he'd want us to honor his legacy by keeping Carson Hardware strong, keeping it in the family, keeping it real. Curtis looked around the room, making sure he had everyone's attention. That's why I'm proud to announce that I'll be taking full ownership of the company, as my father intended. No more half measures, no more hesitation. It's time to get back to what made this business great. Hard work, traditional values, and leadership from someone who actually understands this industry. Several relatives nodded. My Uncle Floyd actually said, "Hear, hear," like we were in some kind of period drama. Then Curtis looked directly at me and smiled. "Some of us," he said, voice dripping with something between pity and contempt, "chose different paths, softer paths. And that's fine. The world needs architects and artists and dreamers." The pause before dreamers was deliberate. But running a business? That takes backbone. That takes someone who's willing to make tough calls, to get their hands dirty, to actually work, instead of just sketching pretty pictures. Tessa grabbed my arm under the table. Several people looked uncomfortable. Most just stared at their plates. Curtis raised his glass. "So here's to Victor Carson. And to the men who are strong enough to carry on what he built. To the men who understand that real success comes from grit, not from college degrees in, what was it again, Wade? Sustainable urban design?" The contempt in his voice could have stripped paint. A few people laughed, not many, but enough. "To the real men," Curtis said, glass high. "The ones who build empires, not the ones who draw little houses." And that's when it happened. Mr. Pemberton, Victor's lawyer, a quiet guy in his 60s who'd been sitting in the corner looking increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat, loud enough that Curtis actually paused mid-sip. "Actually," Pemberton said, standing up with a leather folder, "before we continue, I should probably read the will. Victor was very specific about the timing." Curtis's smile didn't waver. "Of course, though I think we all know what it says." Pemberton opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and I swear to God, the man looked at me for just a second with the tiniest hint of a smile. "The last will and testament of Victor James Carson," he began. "I, Victor James Carson, being of sound mind and body," standard legal stuff. Everyone settled in for the boring part. Then, "regarding Carson Hardware and all associated assets, properties, and holdings, I hereby bequeath ownership as follows." Curtis straightened up, ready for his moment. "To my grandson, Wade Mitchell Carson, 60% ownership and controlling interest in Carson Hardware, including all stores, inventory, real estate, and business accounts." The silence was so complete, I could hear someone's ice cubes settling in their glass. Pemberton continued, unfazed. "To my son, Curtis James Carson, 30% ownership, non-controlling interest, with the stipulation that all major business decisions require approval from the majority stakeholder." Curtis's face went through about 15 expressions in 3 seconds. Shock, confusion, anger, more anger. Then this weird blank thing like his brain had blue-screened. "To be divided among the remaining family members," Pemberton kept reading. 10% split equally among... But nobody was listening anymore. Everyone was staring at either me or Curtis. I hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. Just sat there, my untouched glass of water in front of me, watching my father process the fact that his spineless coward with no future son now owned the family business. Finally, I picked up my water glass, raised it slightly in Curtis's direction. "Thanks for the toast, Dad," I said, voice perfectly calm. "To the real men. The ones Grandpa Victor actually trusted." Curtis's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was just the beginning. The thing about dropping a conversational nuke in a country club is that the acoustics are terrible. 40 people in absolute silence sounds exactly like a funeral, which, considering we'd just left one, felt thematically appropriate. Curtis stood there, staring at the shattered glass at his feet like it held answers. Someone's aunt, I think it was Edith, made this weird choking sound. Uncle Floyd looked like he was doing complex math in his head and coming up with numbers he didn't like. Tessa leaned over and whispered, "Holy hell, Wade, did you know?" "Not even slightly," I whispered back, and that was the truth. Victor had never mentioned this, not once. We'd been close. He'd actually come to my college graduation, sat through my thesis presentation about sustainable community design, told me afterward he was proud. But he'd never said anything about the business. Mr. Pemberton was still standing, looking remarkably calm for a man who'd just detonated a family. There's more to the will, of course. Personal items, the house, some specific bequests. But regarding the business, that's the arrangement. Victor was very clear. He updated this 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Victor had been perfectly healthy 6 months ago. This wasn't some deathbed decision. This was premeditated. Curtis finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous. Wade doesn't know anything about the business. He's never worked a day in retail, never managed employees, never spent 15 years running the stores into the ground," I interrupted. The words came out before I could stop them. "Yeah, you're right. That's your specialty." His face went red. "Watch your mouth." "Or what, Dad? You'll disinherit me?" I smiled. "Oh, wait." Tessa actually snorted. Several cousins looked like they were trying very hard not to laugh. Curtis turned to Pemberton. "There has to be a mistake. My father wouldn't. He knew I was the one who—" "Victor was extremely specific," Pemberton said gently. "He left a letter explaining his reasoning, if you'd like to read it, but the will is ironclad. I wrote it myself. I want to contest it. You can certainly try. But I should mention that Victor anticipated that possibility. There's a clause stating that any family member who legally challenges the will forfeits their entire inheritance, including your 30%. Beautiful. Even from beyond the grave, Victor was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Curtis looked around the room, clearly searching for allies. This is insane. He's a child. He draws pictures for a living. He doesn't understand what it takes to— I'm 32, I said calmly. I have 2 degrees, including an MBA I got specifically because I wanted to understand business. I've run project teams, managed million-dollar budgets, and somehow managed to build a career without publicly humiliating my family members at funerals. So yeah, Dad, I think I'll manage. The MBA was news to him. I could see it in his face. The moment he realized there was a whole part of my life he knew nothing about because he'd never bothered to ask. You have an MBA? My Aunt Vera said, sounding genuinely surprised. Penn State 3 years ago, I said. Part-time while working. Figured architecture was great, but understanding the financial side couldn't hurt. Curtis was doing that thing where his jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles in his neck. This is a hardware business, not some boutique architecture firm. You can't just— Actually, Pemberton interrupted, Victor's letter specifically mentions that he believes Wade's combination of design expertise and business education makes him uniquely qualified to modernize the company. He felt the stores had become stagnant. Ouch! Even the lawyer was throwing shade. Uncle Floyd, Curtis's younger brother, who worked as a regional manager, which mostly meant he showed up twice a week and complained, finally spoke up. What about the rest of us? The people who've actually been there? Your positions remain unchanged, Pemberton said. Wade now has controlling interest. Curtis retains significant ownership, and operations can continue as normal, unless Wade decides otherwise. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't planned this, hadn't prepared a speech, but sitting there looking at my father's face, the same face that had told me I was wasting my life, that architecture was for people who couldn't handle real work, that I'd never amount to anything substantial. Something clicked. Here's what's going to happen, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. I'm going to spend the next week reviewing every aspect of the business. Financial records, store performance, employee satisfaction, everything. Then I'm going to make decisions as the controlling shareholder. You can't just— Curtis started. I can, actually. That's what controlling interest means. But don't worry, Dad. I'm not going to kick you out. That would be cruel. I paused. You're going to stay on as a consultant. We'll figure out a fair salary. You'll have input. But final decisions? Those run through me now. The word consultant hit him like a slap. I could see it. Curtis Carson, who'd introduced himself as owner of Carson Hardware at every social gathering for 15 years, was now a consultant. This is a joke, he muttered. Weird because nobody's laughing, I said. Then I stood up. Mr. Pemberton, I'd like to schedule a meeting next week to review everything in detail. All the paperwork, legal requirements, transition procedures. Of course, Pemberton said, looking almost impressed. I looked around the room. For everyone else, I know this is awkward. I know you probably expected things to go differently. But this is what Victor wanted, and I'm going to honor that. I'm not here to blow everything up. I'm here to make the business better. Tessa caught my eye and gave me a small nod. A few other cousins looked thoughtful rather than hostile. That was something. Curtis was still standing there, looking like someone had rearranged his entire understanding of reality, which, fair, I guess someone had. I'm leaving, he announced to nobody in particular. This is absurd. Pemberton, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. Your 30% might disagree with that decision, I said pleasantly. But you do you, Dad. He left. Didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. Just grabbed his jacket and walked out of the country club like a man who'd just discovered his favorite parking spot had been given to someone else. The room stayed quiet for another few seconds. Then Uncle Floyd said, Well, this is the weirdest Tuesday I've had in a while. It's Friday, Aunt Vera corrected. Still weird. People started talking again, that nervous buzz of people processing drama. I felt Tessa's hand on my shoulder. You okay? Honestly? I have no idea, I admitted. I just inherited a business I never expected to own, publicly humiliated my father, and apparently have to figure out how to run 7 hardware stores. Could be worse, she said. How? You could still be the guy who draws little houses. I laughed. Couldn't help it. Fair point. Mr. Pemberton approached with a business card and a folder. Here's my information. Victor's letter is in here, along with some other documents he wanted you to have. He was very proud of you, Wade. I took the folder. Thanks, I think. As people started filtering out, some offering awkward congratulations, others avoiding eye contact entirely, I sat back down and opened the folder. Victor's handwriting, shaky but clear, on the first page. Wade, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Curtis probably just had a meltdown. Good. He needed one. You're smart enough to figure out what to do. Trust your instincts. And remember, hardware stores aren't about hammers and nails. They're about people building things. You understand that better than anyone. Victor. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I smiled. Time to build something. The first thing I did Monday morning was walk into the flagship Carson Hardware on Route 421 in Siler City wearing jeans and a hoodie, looking exactly like a customer who had no idea what he needed. Nobody recognized me. Why would they? I hadn't set foot in one of these stores in probably 8 years. The place looked exactly like it did in my childhood, and that was the problem. Same layout from 1995, same flickering fluorescent lights, same linoleum that was probably older than me. The grand opening 1989 banner was still hanging in the back corner, sun-bleached and sad. I wandered the aisles for 20 minutes. Not a single employee asked if I needed help. 2 were standing by the registers having an intense conversation about someone's ex-boyfriend. Another was scrolling through his phone behind a display of paint cans. The customers, all 5 of them in a 10,000-square-foot store on a Monday morning, looked equally lost and equally ignored. I bought a screwdriver. The cashier, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, didn't make eye contact once. Just scanned it, took my cash, and went back to his phone. 10 out of 10 experience. Really felt that personal touch Grandpa Victor was famous for. I visited all 7 stores over the next 3 days, drove across half of North Carolina, hitting every location: Greensboro, Burlington, Asheboro, Sanford, Carthage, Southern Pines, and back to Siler City. Same story everywhere: outdated layouts, disengaged employees, customers wandering around like they'd been abandoned in a maze. The store in Asheboro had a literal cobweb in the corner of the front window display. The one in Burlington had half the lights off to save on electricity, which just made it look like a crime scene. This was what Curtis had been doing for 15 years, this masterpiece of retail excellence. Thursday afternoon, I met with the company accountant, a tired-looking woman named Joelle in her 50s who'd been doing the book since Victor's time. We met at a Starbucks in Pinehurst because apparently the corporate office, a rented suite above the Siler City store, was being renovated, which I later learned meant Curtis didn't want me seeing it yet. Red flag? Red flag. Joelle brought 3 file boxes of paperwork and a laptop that looked like it had survived a war. Okay, I said, settling in with my coffee. Give it to me straight. How bad is it? She looked at me with the expression of someone who'd been waiting years to have this conversation. How much do you want to know? Everything. She opened her laptop, pulled up spreadsheets that made my eyes hurt, started talking. Revenue was down 18% over the last 5 years. Profit margins had shrunk from a healthy 22% to barely 9%. Employee turnover was at 47% annually, which, for retail, is high, but for a supposedly family-oriented business? Catastrophic. Curtis had been cutting costs everywhere that showed on paper: payroll, training, maintenance, inventory diversity, while somehow still spending like crazy on things that didn't. Company car, a BMW. Business trips that looked suspiciously like vacations. A country club membership listed as client entertainment. He's been taking a salary of $200,000 a year, Joelle said quietly, while store managers make $38,000 and can't get approval for a $100 repair order without 3 signatures. I sat back, did some quick math in my head. 7 stores, average revenue per location, subtract costs, factor in the waste. We should be making double what we're showing, I said. At least, Joelle agreed. Your grandfather knew. That's why She gestured vaguely. You know, the will. Yeah. He came to me about 8 months ago, asked me to prepare a full audit. Didn't tell me why. I put together everything. All the numbers, the trends, the problems. He read it, didn't say a word, just thanked me and left. 2 months later, he updated his will. She pulled out another folder. He left this for you. Said to give it to you after the reading. Inside was a handwritten note on Victor's personal stationery, the stuff with the little hammer logo he'd designed himself back in the 70s. Wade, Joelle's a good person. Trust her. The numbers don't lie even when Curtis does. Fix it. You know how. The stores aren't broken. They're just run by someone who stopped caring about anything except looking successful. Remember? We're in the people business, not the hammer business. V. Underneath was a flash drive. What's on this? I asked. Everything, Joelle said. Complete financial history. Employee surveys he commissioned secretly last year. Customer feedback. Video footage from the store's security cameras showing what actually goes on during business hours. Mystery shopper reports. He documented everything. I stared at the flash drive like it was nuclear codes. Which, in a way, it was. Curtis doesn't know about any of this? Victor specifically told me not to tell him. Said Curtis would just find a way to bury it or explain it away. She leaned forward. Look, I don't know if I should be saying this, but your grandfather was heartbroken. He built something real, something that mattered to people, and he watched it turn into this. He tried talking to Curtis, tried getting him to care about the quality, the community, the employees. Curtis just kept saying everything was fine, the numbers were fine, it was all fine. While bleeding the business dry, I said. While bleeding the business dry, she confirmed. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. The actual state of affairs was somehow worse than the surface numbers suggested. Supplier relationships had soured because Curtis constantly delayed payments. 3 of the stores had been cited for safety violations that were never fixed. Employee morale was so low that 2 locations couldn't keep staff for more than 6 months at a time. Why didn't anyone say anything? I asked. Uncle Floyd, the managers, someone? Floyd's barely there, and honestly, he just does what Curtis tells him. The managers tried. At least 4 of them have written formal complaints over the years. Curtis dismissed everyone. 2 quit. The rest just stopped trying. There it was. The full picture. Curtis hadn't just run the business badly. He'd been actively hostile to anyone who tried to make it better. And Victor had known, had documented it, had handed me the evidence and the power to fix it. Okay, I said, closing the laptop. Here's what we're going to do. I spent Friday in my apartment, a decent 2-bedroom in Durham, close to where I'd been working at an architecture firm before this whole thing happened, mapping out a plan. I pulled out my architecture training and applied it to retail space design. Researched modern hardware store layouts, customer flow patterns, lighting psychology. Looked at what Home Depot and Lowe's were doing, then figured out how to adapt it to smaller, community-focused stores. Then I used my MBA knowledge to build a real business plan. Cost analysis, ROI projections, employee retention strategies, marketing approaches, supply chain improvements. I called Tessa Friday night, probably around 10. How's it going, business tycoon? She answered. I'm about to commit corporate patricide, I said. Figuratively, that's not a real word. It is now. Tessa, the business is a disaster. Curtis has been running it into the ground while paying himself a fortune and ignoring everyone who tried to help. Shocking, she said, completely unsurprised. Victor knew. He documented everything, left me all the evidence. I think he wanted me to do this. Not just take over, but actually fix what Curtis broke. So what are you going to do? I looked at my laptop, at the spreadsheets and plans and proposals I'd been building. I'm going to renovate. Not just the stores, the whole operation. New layouts, new systems, new culture. And Curtis is going to have to sit there and watch. He's going to lose his mind. Good. He spent 32 years making me feel like I wasn't good enough. Time to return the favor. That's cold, Wade. That's justice, I corrected. There's a difference. Saturday morning, I sent an email to Curtis, Floyd, and all 7 store managers requesting a full board meeting Monday at 9 a.m. at the Siler City office. Subject line, Strategic Planning Session, Mandatory Attendance. Curtis replied within 5 minutes. This is premature. We should wait. I replied, I'm the majority shareholder. Meeting is Monday at 9. See you there. He didn't respond. Sunday night, I barely slept. Kept running through the presentation in my head, anticipating objections, preparing responses. Part of me felt guilty. Curtis was still my father, and I was about to systematically dismantle everything he'd built his identity around. But then I remembered that toast at the country club. To the men who build empires, not the ones who draw little houses. Yeah, guilt faded pretty quick. Monday morning, I put on my best suit, loaded up my laptop, and headed to Siler City with a box full of printed presentations and the confidence of a man holding every single card. Time to show Dad what drawing little houses actually taught me. Curtis showed up 12 minutes late wearing a suit that probably cost more than most employees made in a month. Power move, or so he thought. He walked into the cramped office above the Siler City store like he owned the place, which technically he owned 30% of, which might as well be a participation trophy at this point. Floyd was already there, looking uncomfortable. The 7 store managers sat around the conference table that had definitely seen better decades. Scratched laminate, wobbly leg, the works. Real executive suite vibes. I was at the head of the table with my laptop connected to the ancient projector I'd found in a supply closet. Very professional setup. Very guy who draws little houses. Morning, Dad, I said pleasantly. Thanks for joining us. He didn't respond. Just sat down at the opposite end of the table, arms crossed. Classic power pose. Real intimidating when you're about to get demolished. All right, let's get started, I said. I've spent the last week reviewing the business top to bottom. Visited every store, analyzed the financials, talked to employees, looked at customer feedback, and I've put together a comprehensive restructuring plan. Restructuring? Curtis repeated, like the word tasted bad. We don't need restructuring. We need consistency, stability. Not some kid fresh out of... I'm 32 with an MBA and a decade of professional experience managing complex projects and budgets, I interrupted calmly. But sure, kid works too. Anyway, I clicked to the first slide. Let's talk numbers. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through everything. Revenue decline, profit margin collapse, employee turnover that would make a fast food joint look stable, customer satisfaction scores that were frankly embarrassing, mystery shopper reports that read like horror stories. The managers started nodding. They'd been living this reality. Seeing it quantified just confirmed what they already knew. Curtis's face got progressively redder. This is cherry-picked data, he said when I paused. You can make numbers say anything if you... These are the official company records, I said. From Joelle, who, by the way, Grandpa Victor trusted completely. Did you want to call her a liar? Silence. Now, I continued, here's the good news. This is fixable. I've developed a complete renovation plan for all 7 stores. Modern layouts, better lighting, improved inventory systems, employee training programs, competitive wages, customer service standards. I've run the numbers. Initial investment of $400,000 across all locations, paid back within 18 months based on conservative projections. I showed them the mock-ups I'd designed. Clean, professional, welcoming spaces that actually looked like places people would want to shop. Not abandoned warehouses with flickering lights. The managers leaned forward. One of them, guy named Heath from the Burlington store, actually smiled. Curtis was doing mental math, trying to find the trap. $400,000? We don't have that kind of cash sitting around for your little interior design project. Actually, we do, I said. We have about $600,000 in reserves, which would be closer to $1 million if someone hadn't been taking a $200,000 salary while store managers make $38,000. Direct hit. Floyd winced. The managers looked at each other. My salary is commensurate with industry standards for... Curtis started. For companies 5 times our size, sure, I said. But we're not Home Depot. We're 7 stores in North Carolina. And while you've been paying yourself executive money, our stores have been falling apart, and our people have been leaving because they can make more at Target. I clicked to the next slide. So here's the plan. Effective immediately. Comprehensive renovation starts in Siler City, then rolls out to all locations over 6 months. Employee wages increase by 15% across the board with performance bonuses, new training program, modern inventory system, and restructured management. Restructured how? Curtis asked, voice tight. Floyd, you're moving to full-time operations manager overseeing all locations. Actual job with actual responsibilities. Heath, you're promoted to regional training coordinator. The rest of you get expanded authority and budgets to make decisions without 3 signatures for a light bulb. The managers looked stunned. Floyd looked terrified but intrigued. And your father? Curtis asked. What's my role in this fantasy? I smiled. Consultant, like I said. 20 hours a week, advisory capacity, $50,000 a year, which is generous considering. The room went dead quiet. 50? Curtis couldn't even finish the sentence. I built this company into what it is. Yeah, I said. That's the problem. Heath actually laughed. Tried to cover it with a cough. Didn't really work. You can't do this, Curtis said, standing up. I have 30% ownership. I have rights. I'll fight this. You can try, I said calmly. But as majority shareholder, I control board decisions. Speaking of which, I looked around the table. All in favor of the restructuring plan as outlined? Every hand went up, even Floyd's after a hesitation that felt like a small eternity. Motion carries, I said. Thanks, everyone. Detailed implementation plans will be distributed by end of day. Let's build something Victor would be proud of. The managers filed out, looking energized. Maybe for the first time in years. Floyd lingered. Gave me this complicated look that was part respect and part, please don't fire me, then left. Curtis and I were alone. You smug little, he started. Careful, I said. HR violations are expensive. He stared at me with pure hatred. You think you've won? You think you can just waltz in here and destroy what I built? Dad, I said, closing my laptop, I'm not destroying what you built. I'm fixing what you broke. There's a difference. Victor never understood modern business, he spat. He was sentimental, soft, too focused on making people feel good instead of making money. I made this company profitable. You made yourself profitable, I corrected. The company? You ran it into the ground while taking 6 figures and telling everyone everything was fine. Victor knew. That's why he left it to me. Curtis grabbed his briefcase. I'm done here. Consultant hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays, 9 to 2, I called after him. Don't be late. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the walls. I sat there for a moment, alone in the crappy office, and realized I was shaking. Adrenaline, probably, or the weight of having just systematically dismantled my father's entire professional identity in front of 7 witnesses. Felt pretty good, honestly. The next 6 months were chaos, but the good kind. We renovated all 7 stores one after another. I worked 16-hour days, splitting time between my architecture firm, which I was still technically employed at, and Carson Hardware. The managers stepped up huge. Employees who'd been checked out for years suddenly started caring again because they were actually being paid fairly and treated like humans. The flagship store in Siler City was last. I'd saved it deliberately. When it was done, modern lighting, intuitive layout, clean aesthetic, actual customer service area where people could get help, I scheduled the grand reopening for a Saturday in September, and I renamed it. The sign went up Friday night. Victor Carson Hardware, a new generation. Curtis's name, which had been on that building for 15 years, was gone, replaced with his father's, with a tagline that made it crystal clear this wasn't the same old store. I invited Curtis to the reopening. Professional courtesy. Also because I'm apparently petty. He showed up, stood in the parking lot staring at the sign. I walked over. Thanks for coming. You erased me, he said quietly. No, I said. I honored the person who actually deserved to be honored. You spent 15 years putting your name on things. Victor spent 40 years actually building something that mattered. This is just correcting the record. Inside, the store was packed. Customers, employees, local news covering the dramatic renovation of historic hardware store. I'd prepared a speech about legacy and community and Victor's vision. Curtis stood in the back watching me talk about what his father built, what it meant, how we were returning to those values. Watched people applaud, watched employees smile. Then he left, didn't say goodbye, just walked out to his BMW and drove away. Floyd found me after. That was brutal, man. Yeah, I agreed. It was also necessary. He's not going to forgive you. Honestly, Floyd, I don't think I need him to. The store's first-day sales broke records. By November, we were up 43% across all locations. Employee turnover dropped to 8%. Customer satisfaction scores went through the roof. Turns out, people like shopping at places that aren't depressing disasters run by someone who stopped caring. Curtis kept showing up for his consultant hours. Barely spoke. Submitted suggestions that were just complaints about everything I'd changed. I thanked him for his input and ignored approximately 90% of it. December, at the company Christmas party I'd organized, first one in 5 years, Heath pulled me aside. Man, I gotta say, when you took over, I thought it was going to be a disaster. Rich kid playing businessman. And now I'm wondering how fast I can buy stock if you ever go public. He grinned. You actually gave a damn. That's all it took. That night, I drove past the Siler City store on my way home. The new sign lit up against the December sky. Victor Carson Hardware, a new generation. My phone buzzed. Text from Tessa. Saw the quarterly numbers you sent. Holy cow, Victor would be so proud. I typed back, thanks. Think Dad noticed? Her response, oh, he noticed. That's why he's miserable. I smiled. Yeah, that was kind of the point. Here's the thing nobody tells you about inheriting a family business and systematically dismantling your father's ego. It doesn't feel as good as you'd think. Don't get me wrong. It feels pretty good. Just not in the simple, uncomplicated way you'd hope. It's now been 14 months since that country club lunch. Since Curtis toasted real men and the universe decided to check his work. The business is thriving. Year-end numbers came in last week. We're up 62% from when I took over. All 7 stores are profitable. Employee satisfaction surveys look like something from a motivational poster. We've hired 43 people and only lost 2. 1 retired, 1 moved to Colorado for family reasons. That's not turnover. That's just life. I ended up leaving my architecture firm to run Carson Hardware full-time. Turns out, designing spaces people actually want to be in translates pretty well to retail. Who knew? Well, Victor knew. That's kind of the whole point. Floyd's actually good at his job now that he has real responsibility. Turns out he wasn't lazy. He was just demoralized by working under Curtis. He sent me a thank you card last month. A literal thank you card like we're in a Hallmark movie. It said, thanks for seeing potential I didn't know I had. I keep it in my desk drawer for days when imposter syndrome hits. Heath's training program is now being used as a model by 2 other independent hardware chains in the region. He got offered a corporate job at Lowe's with double the salary. Turned it down. Said he'd rather build something real than be employee number 47,000 in a soulless corporation. Victor would have liked him. The managers I inherited, the ones who survived Curtis's reign of apathy, are running their stores like they own them. Because now they kind of do. I implemented profit sharing last quarter. Revolutionary concept. When the business does well, the people who made it happen also benefit. Curtis called it socialist nonsense. I called it basic human decency and smart business. We agreed to disagree, which is our primary form of communication now. Speaking of Curtis, he still shows up for his consultant hours, still submits his reports that read like passive-aggressive diary entries. Suggestion: consider that traditional methods have value. Translation: everything you're doing is wrong and I'm mad about it. We had Thanksgiving at my Aunt Vera's house, neutral territory. Curtis showed up late, left early, and spent the entire time looking like someone had canceled his favorite TV show. When Uncle Floyd mentioned the business was really turning around, Curtis just grunted and asked someone to pass the potatoes. My cousin Tessa cornered me in the kitchen. He looks miserable. Yeah, I said. Does that bother you? I thought about it. Really thought about it. You know what bothers me? That it took public humiliation and legal documentation for him to even consider that maybe I wasn't worthless. That's what bothers me. His misery? That's just consequences. She nodded. Fair. Christmas was worse. Family gift exchange. Curtis got me a book called Humility in Leadership. I got him a framed photo of the new Siler City store sign, Victor Carson Hardware, a new generation. He didn't say thank you. But here's the weird part. The part I didn't expect. I don't hate him. I thought I would. Thought that once I had the power, once I'd proven everything he said about me was wrong, I'd feel this righteous anger forever. But I don't. Mostly, I just feel tired and a little sad. Because Curtis could have been part of this. Could have been proud. Could have said, "Nice job, son," just once and meant it. But he can't. Something in him won't let him see me as anything except the kid who disappointed him by choosing the wrong career. And that's not my problem anymore. Victor's letter is still in my office. I read it sometimes when things get hard, when I'm dealing with supplier issues or employee conflicts or the 1,000 little fires that come with running a business. We're in the people business, not the hammer business. He was right. The hammers are just tools. The people, the employees who show up every day, the customers who trust us to help them build things, the community that keeps coming back, that's the actual business. Curtis never understood that. He understood profit margins and efficiency metrics and his own bank account. And yeah, those things matter, but they're not the point. Last week, a guy came into the Siler City store, older gentleman, maybe 70, asked for me specifically. Said he'd been shopping at Carson Hardware since 1975, stopped coming around 2015 because it just wasn't the same anymore, but heard we'd renovated. Wanted to see if the old spirit was back. I walked him around, showed him the new layout, introduced him to employees who actually knew what they were talking about, watched him light up like he'd found something he'd lost. "Your grandpa would be proud," he said on his way out. "Thanks," I said. "That means a lot." "Your dad here too?" "Sometimes, Tuesdays and Thursdays." He nodded slowly. "Huh, interesting." "Yeah, interesting. Look, I'm not going to stand here and pretend this story has some neat moral about forgiveness or family healing. Curtis and I probably aren't going to have some heartwarming reconciliation where he admits he was wrong and we hug it out. That's not how real life works. But I will say this. The best revenge isn't making someone miserable. It's becoming the person they said you'd never be. It's building something they couldn't. It's proving that their limited vision of who you are doesn't define your actual potential. Curtis told me I was too weak, too soft, too artistic to run a business. Turns out, those were exactly the qualities the business needed. So here's to the cowards with no future, to the ones who draw little houses, to the dreamers who turn out to be builders, and to grandfathers who see you clearly when your own father refuses to look. Victor Carson knew what he was doing. Took me 32 years and one devastating will reading to understand that. Worth it.